On this Wednesday night, more casualties in Libya, the growing mass graves and the desperation for aid. Outrage over a stabbing spree.
I am white-hot angry.
The accused attacker's violent past and questions about why he was out on a day pass. The federal Liberals' big housing promise.
Today is going to be the first time that we've done something like this in Canada.
A reality check on the government's pledge. Useless, how doctors say some popular cold and allergy meds are a waste of money. Plus, providing healing, hope, and compassion.
Everything's going to be all right.
The Unique Camp helping kids and families cope with grief and loss.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The magnitude of the devastation in Libya, where torrential rain caused 2 dams to collapse, is hard to comprehend. More than 5,000 people are now presumed dead. Thousands more are still unaccounted for. In the port city of Derna, where a tsunami-like rush of water carried away buildings and people, entire families are among the missing. This satellite image shows the heart of the city on September 11th, a day before the deadly floods. The next day, entire neighborhoods are no longer recognizable. And on the outskirts of town, a once lush community all but disappeared overnight. Once one of Africa's most prosperous countries, decades of lawlessness have left Libya fragile. International aid is arriving, but with the war-torn nation scrambling to respond, many fear it's just not fast enough. Redmond Shannon reports.
A city annihilated, its remaining people bereft. A father standing over the body of his son. An exhausted medic breaking down, unwilling to guess how many people have died in Derna. This man lists the 11 members of his family who died, calling it a disaster in every sense of the word. The missing are presumed dead under the rubble and mud or carried out to sea. This response team from Turkey with the grimmest of tasks, combing the shore for bodies. The dead carried to mass graves as quickly as possible.
There was criminal negligence behind what happened over the last 72 hours. This was not just a natural disaster. The alarm never went off. In fact, the opposite happened, and they were told to stay indoors.
Libyan Anas El Gomati says the years of political chaos in his country are to blame for the disaster and for hindering the response.
So even those that made it out of this for the last 72 hours are now facing the most incredibly difficult circumstances because of this division, because of this rivalry, and because of tin pot autocrats that never want to let go of power.
Some aid is making it to the affected region in eastern Libya. Libyan Canadians say much more is needed and that the country's 2 competing governments have to cooperate to get it to those who are suffering.
So there's a lot of fear, a lot of guilt as well, being here in Canada and just feeling helpless and not being able to help out.
Aid may help survivors through the coming days and months. Healing their grief will take much longer. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
In Morocco, the number of people killed in that powerful earthquake is approaching 3,000, and the hope of finding survivors is dwindling. Search crews are digging through endless piles of debris for any signs of life, and many of those who survived are now spending a 6th night out in the open. Many roads are inaccessible by vehicle. Some people are using donkeys to move supplies to remote villages. There's frustration over the slow pace of the government's response. Crystal Goomansingh traveled to one hard-hit village where the main road just reopened.
He watched their bodies, prayed for them, and oversaw their burials. 3 children and 3 adults, victims of Morocco's catastrophic earthquake.
It's one of my duties to look after the people who are dead, the Islamic way.
Ighil is a small village near the epicenter of the quake. It is in a remote location high in the Atlas Mountains and the only road officially reopened Tuesday. Locals are just now receiving aid. The imam for the community, Ibrahim Ayet Boumedrik, shows our crew around, sharing what it was like the night of the earthquake through our interpreter, Karim.
Like it was a lot of shaking, and then this threat was so big. It was not like that. It was bigger, like about half a meter bigger. And then in the second shaking, it goes back. And a lot of people were inside it, and they were like afraid. They didn't know what to do. But like
people fell in?
Yeah, exactly. People fell in, but luckily they just get out before it
closed back up. Wow. Okay. Here, like in many devastated mountain communities, people are saying the help provided has been from their own community or people nearby, not the government or the military. There are questions over coordination of logistics. Now, 5 days after the earthquake, bright utilitarian tents are springing up along the mountainside. For those who have fled their remote mountain villages and towns, a military field hospital has been set up in Asni. Some of the injuries are physical, others emotional. Regardless of the location, the suffering here is great. This teenager lost 10 family members. She cries, holding a photo of her brother when he was just a little boy. A treasured keepsake she went digging to recover. Well, there are many questions. The most pressing might be how and when people in remote villages up in the mountains will get permanent housing. Those tents simply won't cut it when the rain comes. And the village we were up in today doesn't have any toilet facilities or showering facilities. Rebuilding is going to be a monumental task. Donna?
Crystal Goomansingh in Morocco tonight, thanks. And to help Morocco, Canada's federal government says it will match donations to the Canadian Red Cross. All donations from September 8th to the 28th will be matched to a maximum of $3 million. An additional $2 million will go towards the immediate needs of those affected. We are learning some disturbing details about a triple stabbing in Vancouver. It happened on Sunday at a celebration in the city's Chinatown. 3 people were injured and a 64-year-old man is in custody. It's since emerged he was on an unescorted day pass from a forensic psychiatric hospital and has a history of knife attacks, including the death of his own daughter. BC's Premier says he can't fathom why the man was allowed out. As Eric Sorensen explains, thousands of day passes are given to psychiatric patients, but this case is calling into question the process.
The festival is called Light Up Chinatown, but the excitement turned to panic when a man with a knife attacked.
I touched my back.
3 people were stabbed.
He missed my back and then got my arm.
The accused attacker, 64-year-old Blair Donnelly, was convicted of killing his daughter 17 years ago. He was out on a day pass from a forensic psychiatric hospital. That's not unheard of.
But there are some people in our community that don't function well and are a danger to the general public. And this person is one of those people.
What troubles many, including the Premier, is that Donnelly attacked someone else in 2009 after being released once before.
I am white-hot angry that this person was released unaccompanied into the community to have a devastating impact on all of the hard work of all of these community members.
It puts the hospital in Coquitlam and the review process in BC under intense scrutiny.
We need to make sure that these facilities have the medical resources to keep absolutely sure that this patient is ready for being out alone for a day.
The Forensic Psychiatric Hospital provides more than 4,000 day passes a year. Only about 7 on average fail to return. Psychiatric patients must be deemed clinically ready for a day pass, especially if there's a history of violence.
They need to be careful as to when the treatment has been successful and when they're safe to be released. And this event is a very, very big red flag.
Society must balance the rights of patients and the risk to the community. But when an attack happens, it can be devastating.
For this is very serious crime, why they let him go out? Not just walk out and then you just scared us. Someone might hit you again.
The Premier says there will be an independent investigation into the decision-making process and to ensure there aren't others who represent a similar threat to the community. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
In Alberta, the number of E. coli cases has gone up again. There are now 310 lab-confirmed cases. For comparison, there are usually just 400 cases reported across Canada every year. 10 days after this outbreak was first declared at several Calgary daycares that share a common kitchen, Alberta Health Services says the exact source of the infection still hasn't been identified. Heather Yurix West digs into the questions parents want answered about the public health response.
How fast can you go?
More than a week after an E. coli outbreak was declared at his daycare, Kate Maxwell's son remains at home. The 4-year-old is healthy, but Maxwell says her trust in the child care provider is gone.
I feel like they're morally corrupt. They don't have what it takes to run an operation with the vulnerable sector, and it makes me feel sick handing over money that I work hard so that they can put my child at risk.
Health officials strongly suspect the source of the outbreak is a central kitchen that supplied several daycares in the city. But after testing 11 different food samples in the kitchen and 8 samples of leftover food at the daycares, no E. coli was found. A class action lawsuit against the daycare has already been filed, but this legal expert says within Alberta, there could be larger issues at play.
The other big legal issue is around how we regulate public health. We heard discussions around reducing red tape in healthcare and reducing red tape in childcare. And I think that governments need to be cautious when they're talking about reducing red tape, because regulation is what prevents incidents from happening.
The outbreak in Calgary is now one of the worst in the country's history. In 2007, people died when E. coli contaminated the water supply in Walkerton, Ontario. When it comes to food-related illness, there was an eerily similar case in 1991 among 6 Inuit communities in the Northwest Territories. 129 people tested positive for E. coli. 22 developed hemolytic uremic syndrome, and 2 people died. A sobering reminder of how dangerous this toxin can be, as kids in Calgary now fight for their lives. Heather Yurix West, Global News, Calgary.
The Prime Minister and the Federal Housing Minister have announced London, Ontario will be the first to receive money from the government's $4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund. It was promised back in 2021 as a way to help cities cut red tape and fast-track the construction of more homes. The Liberals are holding their caucus retreat in London, Ontario. Mackenzie Gray looks into whether this announcement is as significant as the Liberals say it is.
After weeks of waiting, the new housing minister's first major announcement was billed as a big one.
Today is going to be the first time that we've done something like this in Canada, and I don't want to spoil the news that we're going to share a little later this morning.
But when the news dropped, the impact seemed minor.
A $74 million contribution from the Housing Accelerator Fund to the City of London that's going to get more homes built in this community.
That money isn't new, though. It's just the first time the Liberals have used their $4 billion housing fund that was first proposed all the way back in 2021. The Prime Minister hopes to spend more of it.
I want to challenge other mayors right across the country to step up with their proposals too, so we can get building more homes.
But Trudeau's challenge won't work. The fund stopped taking applications from cities in August. The $74 million will build 2,000 new units like this one in London, but it's a rounding error in the housing crisis. The Canadian Housing and Mortgage Corporation, Fraser's own federal agency, reiterating all levels of government need to build 3.5 million additional homes by 2030 to restore affordability.
Housing starts this year are going to be flat to down, we project, but in reality we need a drastic increase in housing supply, housing starts, in order to get to affordability.
Let's get back to work.
A target the Prime Minister wouldn't commit to.
No one order of government can solve housing on its own. It takes all of us working together.
One thing Trudeau did admit, house prices are too high and they need to stall, but he wouldn't put a timeline, Donna, on a new federal plan to achieve that goal.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in London, Ontario, thanks. The real concerns about artificial intelligence. Coming up, the push to regulate the industry before it's too late. North Korea's leader has offered Russia's president his support in what he calls the sacred fight against the West. Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin toured a Russian space rocket facility. Putin promised to help North Korea with its spy satellite program. Its 2 attempts to launch spy satellites have failed. Kim told Putin North Korea would make bilateral ties with Russia its #1 priority. There are concerns North Korea may help Putin with his war on Ukraine by supplying Russian forces with artillery shells and other munitions. Some of the world's biggest names in tech were in Washington, D.C. today. The U.S. Senate held the first in a series of forums on artificial intelligence as lawmakers struggle to figure out how to regulate technology they barely understand.
The consequences of AI going wrong are severe. So we have to be proactive rather than reactive.
Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk was there, joined by Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and ChatGPT's Sam Altman. It was a crash course on the rapid development of AI. There is rare bipartisan agreement for the need for AI guardrails. They're worried about how it will alter jobs, spread misinformation, and potentially develop its own kind of intelligence. Some tech executives have said they want to be part of shaping AI regulations. Some, though, have criticized the summit for being held behind closed doors. Decongestant debunked ahead. Why you might want to check the ingredient list on your cold medicine. A nasal decongestant that's in multiple cold medicines doesn't actually work. That's what the American Food and Drug Administration has found, and it could result in the remedies being pulled from store shelves. New research shows the main decongestant ingredient in versions of Dayquil, Neocitrin, and Mucinex is no better than a placebo. Catherine Ward on what you need to know the next time you shop for a decongestant.
You might want to think twice when reaching for a medication to get rid of a plugged up nose.
With any of these drugs, there's a powerful placebo effect.
An advisory panel to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration issued a report saying orally administered phenylephrine is not effective as a nasal decongestant.
We made the recommendation to withdraw all currently available oral formulation of phenylephrine at 10 milligram as the OTC products.
The drug at the heart of the issue is phenylephrine.
So basically, it's a constrictor. It dries things up.
In the early 2000s, the main ingredient in many cold medications was often being used to make the street drug crystal meth. Some of those medications are still available in pharmacies. They're now behind the counter. But many cold medications made the swap to phenylephrine.
But the drug might not do everything you expect.
It's actually not absorbed well when we take it by tablets or liquids, so by mouth. And that's how most people take it, which means that the vast majority of people get no efficacy, but some people might get a little bit.
Dr. Michael Reeder isn't surprised by the U.S. report.
We made the same statement with respect to children, but the data with adults is not very convincing either.
That statement from the Canadian Pediatric Society was issued in 2011. If you are congested, medical experts say simple treatments can be effective.
You're making sure that you're running a humidifier, keeping yourself well hydrated, taking a bit of acetaminophen or ibuprofen for symptoms of aches and pains.
Talking with your pharmacist is another good way to ensure that what you take will actually help. Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
Life after loss. Next, how a unique retreat provides help and hope to grieving Canadian families. There is a shortage of mental health professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, and counselors right across this country. That's left thousands of people on waiting lists and trying to find support wherever they can. A small charity in BC is stepping up, offering help to young people and families navigating serious illness, loss, and grief. Neetu Garcha reports.
They are my parents' wedding rings.
17-year-old Lily Friesen wears symbols of her parents' love on her finger.
My mom's ring is actually engraved, and it says everything's going to be all right.
She was just 7 when an illness claimed her father's life. Lily and her mother went to this unique camp for support for years, eventually becoming volunteer peer mentors. Then last year, Lily's mother also passed away.
I allow myself to see memories not as something that should be hidden because the person is gone, but something that should be remembered and shared because that means that the person still lives on through those memories.
Music therapy.
I'd like you to sing me a song.
Is one of the tools a small BC-based charity called Lumera uses in Canada's first bereavement retreat for grieving children and families, a sort of summer grief camp.
The first of its kind in Canada, and I think still one of the only programs where the whole family comes together to get support for their grief.
I don't know where I would be without Camp Carrie after losing so many people.
Camp Carrie uses a range of counseling, therapy dogs, land-based healing, and education. It's care these families couldn't otherwise afford or find. There's one 4-day camp in BC this week and another in Ontario in October.
When he was in grade 1, he started acting out.
Crystal Blair says the camp experience changed the trajectory for her son when her husband passed away.
By the time we got into grade 2, he was a totally different kid. So I think just allowing them to be heard and allowing him to realize I'm not the only one.
Lumera had a total of 145 families apply for the 2 camps this year. That's the most interest it's seen since its inception in 2007, and twice as many applicants as they have spaces.
During the pandemic, the government did provide funding for mental health support. That did not include bereavement care.
With thousands of families across Canada struggling through grief amplified by the pandemic and the toxic drug poisoning crisis, Lumera is among advocates urging the Canadian government to create a national bereavement strategy, like in the US and the UK.
I am determined to help other people receive that support because it helps me more than I can say.
Lily will graduate high school next year with hopes of studying psychology and becoming a therapist in a country she hopes will bolster government funding for grief services to meet the rising need. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is this beaver chilling in Calgary's Bow River. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.